Da, 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 da. Ah. Okay, so uh, good good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending where you are in the world. Obviously, some big news coming out of the northeast of England in Steve Bruce resigning by mutual consent, leaving Newcastle United by mutual consent 13 days after the takeover was completed by Amanda Staveley's Saudi-backed led consortium. No real surprise in regards to that move happening. I honestly think that had the takeover taken place last summer, he would have been replaced. Obviously, the situation at Newcastle, long period of decline. The value of the club in the last 5 years is about 35 million less now than what it was when Mike Ashley initially put it up for sale. So there's no real surprise that this has occurred. Obviously, he's coached 1,000 games. It'd be very interesting to see who they get in to be his replacement. They are second bottom. They only have 3 points. They're only second bottom by virtue of having a better goal difference than Norwich. So that's interesting. But the situation that they find themselves in is, they've had a poor start to the season. You could argue that the international breaks haven't helped with momentum and consistency for clubs. Obviously, the international calendar has become a bit more congested because of the World Cup next year in Qatar in December. In November, December, let's have the rescheduled World Cup. So that will be interesting. But it is interesting. Obviously, he had 1,000 games in charge. It'll be interesting to see, as I say, who they get appointed. It'll be interesting to see what they do in the transfer window. But whoever comes in has got to obviously rebuild the confidence of the playing squad, and we'll see what happens. But Steve Bruce has come out and said that this may be his last job in football. The social media side of the whole saga has been pretty toxic. Those around Steve Bruce have said, that it has taken a toll on the Bruce family. It's not been the most pleasant experience. But when Rafa Benitez was there, he was facing the same challenges that Steve Bruce faces now. The lack of investment by Mike Ashley over the last 4.5, 5 years has been very evident. With all the various takeover deals that have been put on the table, takeover attempts, that have been on the table. Speculation with Rafa Benitez was an issue. Speculation around Steve Bruce has been there. So, whatever you may think of Steve Bruce as a manager, I think he's been in a catch-22. He can't win. And there's people saying, "Oh, he's got a nice payout though. It was worth it." You don't go to work to basically cop abuse like that, and not to be given to you don't sign a contract with an employer, regardless if it's sport or industry, to basically not have the backing of your superiors, and you have been. There was a reason why Steve Bruce was made manager, because no one else wanted the job. Same with Nuno at Tottenham. No one else wanted the job. There's clearly within some clubs, or within the sport in general, there is clearly a culture issue. The managerial turnaround. I mean, I think the average expectancy of a manager at a club now is about 18 months. Very few managers make it past 3 years at a club and then can stay on and sign extensions. So Guardiola and Klopp, for example, are exceptions rather than the rule. Obviously, Alex Ferguson and Arsene Wenger, clearly, with their tenures at their clubs, obviously are standouts in the modern era for both of them spending over 2 decades at their respective clubs and bringing a lot of success and stability with that. As I say, when fans want a certain manager out, he might have been successful before. He might have won silverware before. Be careful what you wish for. Um, is my viewpoint on that. Karim Benzema. There's a French sex tape blackmail case trial has started. This was one of the reasons why he was out of the France squad for a while. Um, he's accused of complicity in an attempt to blackmail a fellow player in Valbuena, who is a very skillful player. Notice Valbuena was not at the Euros this summer, and Benzema was back in the squad. That's been an ongoing issue with the French national side for a while, and this goes back to 2015. Both players were at the French training camp. They both got kicked out of the French national side as a result. Um, I mean, yeah, the whole thing is a very messy uh, affair, really. But it is interesting that it dates back to 2015, so it predates Euro 2016. It predates the World Cup, and it has actually had an impact on the French national side and these players' careers. I mean, Valbuena is now 37, near the end of his career. I think he's actually retired. He was at Marseille at the time. Very good, gifted player. But it ultimately led to about Benzema only being recently allowed back in the squad. Um, and it will be very interesting to see what the French court decides, because if Benzema is obviously found guilty of blackmail, that is a serious offence. So we will see what plays out there. They're the two big stories in the sports world at the moment. One has legal implications, and another obviously has job implications and speculation over who replaces who, and that's football. Rugby league, there's a very inexperienced England team to play France on Saturday in Perpignan. Rugby union, there are 12 uncapped players in the Scotland squad for the autumn tests. Um, so they're up and coming. So there's going to be a lot of rugby league and rugby union on free to air TV, which is nice to see. So we've got the autumn tests coming up. We've got the rugby league autumn internationals. We didn't have them last year, obviously, with COVID. Um, so that'll be interesting to see, where England are at post Wayne Bennett as coach, with Sean Wayne in charge. Where the Super League players are at in comparison to the NRL players, because I do believe there is a quality gap. Same with rugby union. There's a lot of uncapped players. We're in a World Cup cycle. We're halfway through the World Cup cycle. We could be seeing a change with the guard with some national sides in regards to the France World Cup that's coming up in 2 years' time. And yeah, we'll see what happens. Oh, people are messaging me. But yeah, so there's going to we're going to see a lot of new young players in the autumn internationals in rugby union, and you could say we were expecting to play a rugby league World Cup now. Obviously, we're playing it next year, so there's going to be some players who wouldn't have actually wouldn't have got a chance necessarily to play at the Rugby League World Cup had it taken place this year. They get a bit of international experience. They get to go to a training camp. They obviously get to experience test level rugby league, which is a step up from club level rugby league, and they get to put themselves in a shop window if they're off contract as well, which is something with the expansion of obviously the NRL with the Redcliffe Dolphins now being admitted as the 17th team, and discussions now being raised up, well, where's the 18th team going to go? We need an even team league. Um, you know, the NRL in Australia and the Australian Rugby League, there are people going, oh, it's going to dilute the talent pool. If there's a lot of good European players that really shine, European-based players in the Super League who shine for France and England, Scotland, Wales, whatever, and put their hand up and say, look, I want to play at the top level, we could see more Super League players making the trip over to Australia and New Zealand. So it'd be interesting to see what plays out in the coming weeks. I know it's a one-off test, obviously with COVID, and and a lot of the travel restrictions. Obviously, we're not seeing like a four nations or a tri nations in the rugby league, which would be nice because I think the last time we had a tour was New Zealand came over here. The GB Lions went to play Papua New Guinea, Tonga, and New Zealand got thrashed in all three games. So it would be nice to see an Australian and New Zealand Kiwi tour. Obviously, they pulled out of the World Cup, citing COVID regulations and the state of the pandemic at the time. And then what actually obviously happened in Australia with lockdowns in Sydney and Melbourne obviously occurred. So the World Cup has been delayed by a year. I can't see it being delayed again. They've obviously fixtured it in such a way that it doesn't clash with the Qatar World Cup for TV rights, because over here in the UK, the BBC has sole broadcast rights, where had it clashed with the Qatar World Cup, BBC has split rights with ITV in the UK for broadcast. I don't know what the broadcast agreements are around the rest of the world for that tournament. It'll be very interesting. But delaying it a year was the last option on the table that the organisers wanted. They were happy to actually play without crowds if that meant Australia and New Zealand came. They had a list of options on the table. They want 3 out of 4 of them. They wanted to play now, basically. The one they didn't want, the least favourable option for the health of the game nationally in the UK, was to play next year. But yet there is government money involved in this tournament as well. The RFL has had emergency loans from the UK government in the last 18 months. That is something else that can't be discounted. I've done videos on that. So this is a vitally important tournament. So we'll see what happens on the weekend. I think International Rugby League needs to get to the same level as other sports internationally, like rugby union and football, soccer. If you're in North America, it doesn't quite have the same standing. It doesn't have an overall governing body. That is a massive weakness of the sport. There's a reason why it's classed as more of a niche team sport internationally and globally, where there's only a handful of professional leagues, really. So on a professional standpoint, it's lagging behind other major sports. I find it, if I'm comparing rugby union to rugby league, I think rugby league, the ball is in play longer. There's less stoppages on if the conditions are right and the teams are playing well. There are less stoppages than rugby union. Pace the games quicker. There's obviously a lot of areas where rugby league can improve. There's no overall universal rule book. So the Super League and Championship and League One has a slightly different rule book to the NRL. State of Origin, I think, is now mirroring the NRL when it comes to the rule book. And then international, you can still fight. Fighting is still allowed in international rugby league. You only get a 10-minute sin bin. You won't get cited for that. So it's something that I think if rugby league is to grow and to be taken more seriously, there needs to be an international governing body that brings all rugby league together. So the Australian Rugby League Commission, the RFL, and really unifies the game internationally, because it is lagging behind significantly behind other professional sports at international level. And it is something that needs to be looked at if it is to grow, and it is the fastest growing sport right now. And part of that is to do with the NRL's return to play at the end of May last year, a lot sooner than a lot of the other professional leagues. That does have a massive part to play in its explosive growth over the last 18 months. Saying that, some of the issues the NRL has faced this season, and to be frank, the Super League are facing as well, financial problems in the Super League over here. It is interesting. Rugby union is going through a transition period as well. I think in hindsight, we could say, yeah, Augustine Pichot should have got the World Rugby gig. I don't think there could be any complaints if he did. A lot of the points he was raising at the time in regards to finance, the stability, the structures of the game are coming home to roost. And he was mentioning these issues before the COVID pandemic. The pandemic exposed them more. Look at the collapse of Super Rugby, from the format it was to what it is now. I think some of his points he was standing on in that election have come to pass. I'm not sure keeping Bill Beaumont in charge is the right direction the game should be taking. There's obviously the debate about head injuries in the sport, player welfare, finances. Obviously, is a major talking point. Obviously, Saracens are now back in the English Premiership. They basically kept the same squad. Let's be honest. Very few players moved on from that squad, so there's still going to be question marks of whether they're cap compliant. And the rebranding of Pro League into the United Rugby Championship, rebranding a failed product, which is pretty much what Pro League was, because the finances there were not stable. Rebranding it isn't going to solve the problems that what was the Celtic League, which became the Pro League, has had since its inception. The Welsh teams still have massive financial problems. The Welsh Union has massive financial problems. And they haven't been solved. Oh, yeah, we'll just change the name of the competition. Doesn't solve the problems that exist. Does not solve the problems that exist. And continue to exist within the game. The fact that the Welsh national side is as competitive and as successful as it has been, considering that domestic game is in crisis, astounds me. Absolutely astounds me that the Welsh national side, while they haven't won a World Cup, they've come close a few times. They've won a fair few Six Nations. The fact that the Welsh national side can be as competitive as they have been, obviously having a coach, Warren Gatland, for a very long time, a bit of stability there, admittedly. Wayne Pivac, there were question marks over his appointment. He's answered them. There's still a lot of question marks, whether that was just because COVID assisted them and they adapted best to a disrupted schedule over other teams. There are question marks about Wayne Pivac, his win percentage. Has he turned the tide? Have some coaching changes helped? We'll see what happens in these autumn internationals. We'll see what happens in next year's Six Nations. We are midway through a World Cup cycle, but the Welsh domestic game in the Welsh Premiership, the United Rugby Championship clubs, so provinces, there is massive financial problems. They're not going away. COVID has exacerbated those issues. It's a good word, but they are still here. They are still a massive problem, and they're not going to be resolved overnight. Quite frankly, I don't know how the Welsh Union is going to resolve a lot of the issues that they have. I think branding of the teams might help bringing back the place names into the franchises, because that, I think, sells it to your community. Dropping the place names was a big blunder on a standpoint of trying to attract fans. But when players were mentioning in the run-up to the World Cup, we're not sure if we've got a club to play for or a team to play for next season, or when we come back from the World Cup. Their selection rules for international policy, I think, hinder them as well with the centralised contracts. Scotland, much the same. With Scotland, to a certain extent Italy as well. The Scottish sport in general has been lagging behind for quite some time, but the issues within Welsh Rugby Union are well founded. and you know, uh, the money side of the game is concerning. Rugby league, we've discussed rugby league and its issues financially in this country. There's rumours circulating that they might contract the Super League, shrink the league, which I think will be a devastating impact. The fact that the London Broncos, have gone part time as of next season, they'll be part time, is worrying, considering they were a Super League club not that long ago. That is a very big concern, and you know the Toronto Wolfpack experiment, misguided. I think best way to describe that, completely misguided. The it's just things aren't necessarily where they should be, in regards to both codes having stability. Um, but we'll see. We'll see what plays out with the autumn internationals. We'll see what plays out. How England France play in Perpignan weekend. You know, obviously World Cup being delayed by a year, I think damages um, rugby league a little bit. But the Euros was delayed by a year, and that was a brilliant tournament. I wasn't a fan of the pan-European concept, with having host cities and playing it across the continent. I think there was obviously each country had its own restrictions on travel and lockdowns and health protocols. So some stadiums did have a limited capacity. But on saying that, I think the Euros, yeah, delay it by a year, brilliant event. I didn't watch the Olympics though. Did not watch the Olympics. Um, just had no interest in it, which is the first Olympics ever that I've not watched a single event. Having no fans, I watched a lot of the NRL. I've watched pretty much every game in the NRL for the last 2 years. No fans in attendance. You know, it just didn't feel the same. I mean, don't get me wrong. The NRL is a brilliant product. Um, you know, a great sport to watch on the TV. It does sell itself. It's a fast, free flowing game when it's played it the right way. Um, some of the rule changes the NRL brought in left some question marks. The Super League and the European competition are sort of following suit with trying to rule changes. Um, I think there's been a lot of rule changes in a very short space of time. I think there needs to be a pause on that. There needs to be a proper review done on how these rule changes have impacted the game, the rate of injuries, head knocks, head injuries, of course. So there needs to be a period of reflection. I don't think any rule changes need to happen next year. I think they need to stabilise what they've got, assess what they've got, and make sure that the rule changes they brought in are appropriate. Um, assess the impact with the data. And yeah, go from there in regards to the rule changes we've seen, especially in the NRL. I mean, the they'll bring in rule changes in mid-season, which I'm not a massive fan of. Personally, I think it disrupts the continuity of the competition. Very reactionary rule changes. Wasn't necessarily. I mean, I'm not against rule changes if they improve the quality of a sport, of a product. I think it's a natural evolution that sports go through. I mean, look, football did it with the back pass rule, for example, in the early 90s. And some may argue it did speed up the game a little bit. Others could argue that it's now being exploited by coaches and teams. A lot of fans aren't necessarily happy with the constant, aimless, slow-paced passing in the back. They want to see flair attacking football, open games. The introduction of VAR, we've discussed VAR to death since its introduction. I would argue that VAR was on a good, solid footing in the World Cup in 2018, and then FIFA and the various associations blundered after that. The implementation hasn't been great. I think the principle behind it is good. The implementation we've seen hasn't been good enough. At the same time, you know, the resistance by FIFA and football in general to technology has been mind-boggling. If the technology is available and other sports that have less money available at international level can use the technology more effectively and have implemented the use of technology for the best part of 2-3 decades pretty effectively, and where they need to make improvements or adjustments, they do so. Boggles my mind that football has taken this long to introduce technology to assist the game in making the right decisions. But then they haven't got the rules right in regards to technology, or the laws of the game, which has created frustration amongst fans, which has created frustrations from experts and in the media, raised a lot of question marks as well. The offside rule, for example, and its interpretation is common sense needs to prevail. If you're having to go to multiple replays, then go with common sense. If it's been flagged offside, keep it offside. If it's been flagged onside, keep it onside. Go with common sense unless it's glaringly obvious that the decision is wrong. You know, that's something that needs to be discussed. I've been asked the question: is the Newcastle United takeover good for the sport? I think it's a bit of both, good and bad. The process behind the takeover was long, drawn out, and painful, really. The lack of transparency in regards to the takeover, the fact other clubs tried in vain in the end to block the takeover. It went to an arbitrator. The arbitrator ruled in favour of the takeover. The fact that more money's been pumped into the game is good, but at the same time, I think there's too much money in the game at this point in time. There's clearly a lack of financial oversight by the governing bodies, be it domestic FAs, UEFA and FIFA, in the European game, I think game globally. That's something that, unfortunately, with the amount of money floating around the game, it's not properly policed, it's not properly regulated. The role of agents within the game, they're not held to account. I think it is a matter of time before a European footballing salary cap is implemented across all UEFA affiliated leagues, which is 60 odd leagues, I think, league structures. I think it's a matter of time before there is some kind of salary or spending cap that's more rigorously enforced than financial fair play. Financial fair play is, well, as Alexander Serafin has come out, is flawed. And that in itself is problematic when the guy governing the game, the guy in charge of the European game, is saying the systems we have in place are broken. It tells you all we need to know about the current state of affairs. This European Super League debacle, I don't think has died a death completely. I think the Euros detracted a lot of attention away from that. Recent events have tended to suggest some of these European big clubs are only big on the value of their owners, the value of their balance sheets or debts, as it seems. How quickly it fell apart. Then we've seen the restructuring, obviously, of the Champions League format in a couple of seasons' time when it comes in. I'm not in favour of how they've decided to restructure that. I've had my views on what I think would be best for the European club competitions. I think go back to straight knockouts, get rid of the pointless group stage games, reinstitute the Cup Winners' Cup as a standalone competition again. We don't need to Europa Conference League. I think that's just another batch of fixtures that managers will complain about, but the club owners will be like, we're getting the money. What we've seen is when they put club games on free-to-air TV, the viewership figures were really strong, much stronger than on subscription TV. Biggest viewership figures ever, the domestic viewership figures for club games outside of like the FA Cup and League Cup. Really strong viewership figures. Fans felt more involved again. The debate about fan ownership, the German model, which is not actually universal in Germany, it's just encouraged in Germany and it's allowed to flourish in Germany. But there's no rule in Germany saying, oh, you have to have this fan model. But I think that's something that, again, has been discussed at some length. I think the governance side of things in regards to the sport, I think there's a long way we can go. I think the governing bodies, there's been so many corruption allegations that have been proven true, match fixing allegations. There's a lot of negativity surrounding the sport. There's a lack of trust from fans. UEFA are constantly facing fan backlash over decisions. Obviously, in the last international break, we saw a lot of crowd disturbances, which, again, more bad negative headlines. Other sports don't seem to have these problems. And when they do, they're very rare and infrequent. So why should football be, have these issues constantly keep, occurring? Because as I say, in regards to other, team sports, these incidents rarely happen, if at all. So that's something, to note, that the crowd trouble between England and Hungary, for example, there was those in the stadium that were Hungarian fans misbehaving. There were England fans outside the stadium misbehaving, hooligans. Come on, let's just stop calling these people fans. They're not. Very unsavoury incidents. The question marks have to be over the policing and security. Again, we saw problems at the Euros. Not on the same scale as in previous tournaments. But, fan behaviour is, press call them fans, I don't call them fans, they're not fans. They're really not. The punishments aren't strong enough, quite frankly. I can remember when Nicholas Bentner had his Paddy Power boxes at Euro 2012, he got a bigger fine, €100,000, bigger fine than, I think it was how many, what England qualifier was it with players? I think it was in run up to this Euros when I think Montenegro or Albania or someone like that. Their fine was not on the same level. So UEFA, I think they've got their priorities wrong. We've seen at tournaments where fans have got branded clothing, and then the organisers tell them to take their T-shirts off because it says Heineken rather than Budweiser. I think it was at the German World Cup. There were fans wearing Heineken T-shirts. They were told to take them off and replace, and because UEFA and FIFA have got its priorities wrong. Yeah, look, I've there's been a lot said about a lot of the social media abuse he's been facing and his family have had to take. His son is an ex-player who played for him at Hull. Last season, he came out and said dad, his dad was suffering quite badly with the social media abuse, and the fan abuse aimed at him. I don't think it's Steve Bruce's fault the club are where they were. I mean, he kept them mid-table. He kept them in the Premier League. He had the same problems that Rafa Benitez was facing, just a less fashionable manager. You know, the results were very similar. Style of football different, but the results were very similar. But I think both managers worked magic with no support from Mike Ashley over the last 4.5, 5 years. None at all. Um, Constant speculation about their coaching futures. Steve Bruce, you can go. He's an average manager. Okay, he hasn't had any silverware, but he nearly won the FA Cup with Hull a few years back. And imagine if he had actually done that. Imagine if Hull had won that FA Cup final, how different things would be. But he managed 1,000 games as a manager. That in itself is really hard to do. You know, some fans still think of him very fondly at the clubs that he managed. Who will be suitable? Well, Eddie Howe is one of those managers who's available where there isn't, where Newcastle don't have to pay a get out clause. So is Antonio Conte. They were both also linked with the Tottenham job. Eddie Howe, Bournemouth got relegated in the aftermath of the COVID disrupted season 2 seasons ago. They just didn't adapt to the return to play. But he managed to take Bournemouth from nearly going out of business when he was appointed manager. They were basically going to get relegated from League One into League Two, and he took them to the Premier League. His tenure at Bournemouth, I think he was the longest tenured manager when he lost his job at Bournemouth when he decided to leave by mutual consent. So he brought stability to a club that before he was appointed manager were in trouble. He plays an attractive brand of the game. He's a young manager, so he's only 43. He did retire young because of injury, but he's a young manager. He hasn't bounced around a lot of clubs. His time at Bournemouth, he was there for over a decade. So I think, is Eddie Howe the right fit? Probably not at this time. But I'm not sure who would be a right fit. Whoever comes in is still going to have basically inheriting the Mike Ashley era squad. The January transfer window is over 2 months away. So whoever comes in has got a period of time to work with what's there. I think a portion of the Newcastle fan base, were very toxic in regards to Steve Bruce, but Rafa Benitez results were very, very similar, ironically. Their league finishing position, very, very similar. Fans loved him. So I have a lot of Newcastle fans who watch and subscribe to this channel. I've been very critical of Mike Ashley's ownership. I've been very critical of the takeover process, how drawn out it's been, the time it's taken from the club being put up for sale to a successful takeover. I have some sympathy for Steve Bruce. I think he's very knowledgeable when it comes to his knowledge of the game. Very successful player. I think the best player never to represent England. He's at the highest level. He's brilliant player, brilliant career. Managerial wise, solid or outstanding. Will he remain in management? Will he manage a club again? He doesn't financially need to. He's contemplating retiring from management. I cannot blame him. It'll be interesting to see who ends up with the Newcastle job. But Eddie Howe and Antonio Conte are clubless at the moment. They are available. Obviously, Conte has managed in the Premier League. Eddie Howe has managed in the Premier League. So, and there's no get-out clause. There's no messy negotiations in getting a manager from another club. Obviously, I believe that if Amanda Staveley had been successful in her takeover initially, when she was initially trying to buy the club in 2017, Rafa Benitez would still be manager. She was very clear that she wanted to keep Benitez as manager. Obviously, that takeover fizzled out over Christmas 2017, New Year's 2018. It just didn't happen. The club remained up for sale. More bids were on the table. Peter Kenyon tried to buy the club. Amanda Staveley circles back again with the Reuben brothers and the Saudi-backed money. Very interesting coalition partners there. That then dragged on. It didn't come to pass. It eventually did, for 35 million less than what was the club was initially valued at in 2017, when Amanda Staveley had her first bid on the table, and 15 million less than what she initially bid. I followed the whole process from day one. I've done a lot of videos on it. I think Newcastle United as a club have had more video content. That's just one team in any sport. Newcastle have had more videos in regards to them than any other sports team on this channel. If you were to type Newcastle United or any Amanda Staveley, Steve Bruce, Rafa Benitez, Mike Ashley, I think I've done about 30, 40 videos that at some point have involved Newcastle United in some way. Am I glad Mike Ashley is out of football? Yep. I've I don't know where Newcastle go from here. I do fear that there's going to be a mass exodus of players and a mass splurge in the transfer market in January. When clubs are doing that, they're panic buys. I think they need to be a bit shrewd in the January transfer window. I think the new manager needs to come in and assess what he needs, make a few tweaks to get them through to the end of the season. Goal is, I think, to avoid relegation at this point, and then in the summer, rebuilding the squad properly. That'll be my way of doing it. Amanda Staveley has come out and stated that the infrastructure of the club needs massive investment, training ground, and the facilities there, the youth system, structures within the club. The new owners have basically said that we need to invest money that isn't the transfer market in actually revamping the club from within, from behind the scenes, investing in the infrastructure side of it. Something that Mike Ashley's neglected for most of the time he's been there. And there's been regular comments made about the state of the training facilities, the youth setup. They have been regularly raised by former managers and former players and former coaches who've worked, been at the club, and former club employees have said, no, there needs to be, away from the footballing side on the field, in front of the fans on a Saturday or midweek games, or whenever they're outside of match days, the infrastructure, the behind the scenes, the everything to do with getting the players on the field. There needs to be mass investment. One thing that is clear about this club: the fans are passionate to almost fanatical levels, but they haven't been close to a trophy since 1999. They haven't won a trophy since, I think, 1956 or 1954, I think, was their last trophy. So several generations of fans have, never seen silverware lifted. They came close in 96, finishing second, I think, by a point, or maybe 2 points, to Man United that season. Steve Bruce actually was captain of Man United that season. The irony of that. So they came close, 96, 98. Runners-up in the FA Cup. 99, runners-up in the FA Cup. To Arsenal and Man United, respectively. They were valued at the time at 660 million. They were the sixth most valuable club in football. 13 days ago, they were sold for 305 million. So in actual terms, and in real terms, because it's actual and real, the club is less valuable now than what it was 22 years ago. That tells its own story, regardless of who the previous ownership was. That tells its own story. In regards to who they get as manager, I've looked at the list, and I can go through the list of potentials. These are what are circulating in the main if these are circulating in the mainstream media. So these obviously sources in the mainstream media are discussing these candidates. Who's going to be the next manager? Who's going to replace Steve Bruce? And I feel sorry for Steve Bruce a little bit. Let's have a look. And there's been a lot of comments on social media about not only how the whole thing was handled, but also who replaces him. So Rafa Benitez was the favourite had the takeover taken place last year or this summer. So had the takeover managed to come through, 12 months previously, I think. Well, if Man United had been successful in 2017, 2018, I think Rafa Benitez would have remained the man in charge and probably would have still been manager now. Personal thought on that. But he's now at Everton and has made, he's more than happy with where he's at. And he's obviously only just got appointed Everton manager. Antonio Conte, he's out of work and he has won 5 top flight titles in 10 years. That's one every 2 seasons. Lucien Favre, he's the former Swiss national team manager. Obviously, he was Borussia Dortmund boss for a couple of years. His teams play a very attacking style. Paulo Fonseca, has been mentioned as the favourite. I mentioned that in the video I did. He's the former Roma boss. He was obviously in talks with Tottenham. He's had, reasonable success. Admittedly in the Ukrainian league with Shakhtar, but he's coached the Porto and Braga, and they're no average clubs really. They're massive clubs in Portugal. Steven Gerrard's been linked, but obviously he has said he wants to coach in the Premier League. I think his job at Rangers isn't finished yet. I think there's more to come from Gerrard north of the border. Eddie Howe has been mentioned again. Very strong contender. No get out clause there because he's also available. You've got Frank Lampard. He's also available. Decent job at Chelsea. Very decent job at Chelsea. Admittedly, he didn't win a trophy, lost the FA Cup final, but if it wasn't for Frank Lampard, a lot of those young players wouldn't have got first team experience with Chelsea. Mancini, I'm not sure he wants to leave the Italy job. I think he wants to take them to the World Cup and win the World Cup with them and continue their unbeaten run, which is just fantastic. The amount of unbeaten games they've gone, international record. But again, he was appointed by Manchester City. It took them a little while, but he won them their first silverware under the current ownership. Martinez, he's been linked with several jobs, including the Tottenham job when it was vacant. He's keen. He's contracted until the World Cup, but there are reports circulating that he wants to get into club management again, but he's failed to win with Belgium. They may be ranked number 1 in the world, failed to win with Belgium, and he's only won the FA Cup with Wigan, who got relegated that season. Zidane is also available. He's won a fair bit in Spanish football, but big battles with big name players. Would Zidane be the one who gets appointed? Can he bring big names to Newcastle? Brendan Rodgers has been linked, but he's actually quite happy at Leicester and has been very successful there. You've got Mourinho. He's settled at Roma now. Jurgen Löw. He's been out of the club game for far too long and hasn't been very successful in club football. Alan Shearer has been quoted as well, but he was only there as an interim, and I don't think he's necessarily the right fit. Great players don't necessarily make great managers. So we'll see, what happens in that regard. We'll see. The whole situation at Man United with Ollie Solskjaer, very similar to, I think, what happened with Steve Bruce at Newcastle. a proportion of the fan base are never happy. But people knew Ferguson was going to retire. The fact that you've had David Moyes, you've had Van Gaal, the Mourinho era, and Van Gaal. They didn't win the league. They still won silverware. That whole debate. You got to be careful what you wish for. I don't like how football doesn't give. I don't like the fact that in just get comfy because I've got that back. Yeah, I don't like the fact that football. Yes, it's a results game. Obviously, you want to win, but a lot of managers just aren't given time. You look at the average managerial contract these days; it's around 18 months. In some leagues, it's as little as a season. I be careful what you wish for. You could argue transfer policy has been a problem at Man United. Even Alex Ferguson, I'm not sure how much control over transfer policy he had by the end. I wouldn't, if you're looking at this Man United squad over the last couple of years under Solskjaer and compare it to the last squad under Ferguson, or any squad under Ferguson, for example, the golfing class is there. It's again, as I say, great players don't always make great managers. I don't think Solskjaer is a bad manager. People go, his time at Cardiff. Well, his time at Mulder, it's the Norwegian league. It doesn't matter. It does matter. He won silverware at Mulder in the Norwegian league. This was a club that had gone through a long period of not winning and not being successful. He made them successful again. So, and that's where I feel, that football fans are a very fickle bunch. A lot of managers aren't given time. A lot of coaches aren't given time to do their job. What has happened in the last 20, 30 years is they're expecting, got to win, got to win, got to win. And it takes time, a lot of time. And, when he was interim manager, the players played for him. They played and they got him his job. Then they started, becoming complacent. Ed Woodward. I mean, you could argue the transfer policy under the Glazers and Ed Woodward wasn't great. Successfully, you could argue that. I would say that. Yeah, I think the managerial circus, as I call it, clubs that constantly chop and change managers, Chelsea notwithstanding, generally aren't very successful. That's my opinion. I mean, look how many managers Watford have had. They've become a yo-yo club. Look at Brighton start the season under Graham Potter. They've gone right. Okay, you've done very well in the Swedish league. A different quality of football, but it's still the same sport. The quality might be a little bit less, but it's still the same sport. They've given him time. Look how Brighton have started the season. I felt sorry for Chris Hughton, to be fair, how he was handled by Brighton, but it's neither here nor there. Look at Wenger at Arsenal. Fans were calling for his head for most of the last 8-10 years he was there. Still won a few more FA Cups. Still brought a bit more silverware, and they qualified for Europe every season he was in charge. Be careful what you wish for. Now, Unai Emery, yeah, he wins the FA Cup. No, Unai Emery didn't win the FA Cup. It was Arteta won the FA Cup after Unai Emery was sacked. And Arteta's found it difficult. And again, with ownership and transfer policy. I think the squad that Solskjaer has is not on the same level any of the squads that Fergie had. And towards the end, the squad that Fergie had wasn't actually as good as people think. A lot of transfer blunders in there. Not as dominant. Um, I would argue that towards the end of Ferguson's time in charge, and the same with Wenger, the squads they had compared to their peak were not on the same level. But also, you have to remember these guys were in charge of these teams between them. I think combined total of 52 years. You add their times in charge. I know they mirrored each other, but if you count their managerial 10 years separately, I think it was about 52 or 53 years between them if you add their managerial times together of managerial experience between the two in the Premier League and well, the old Division One if you count the late 80s for Ferguson. Um, and yeah, those teams became less successful towards the end. And I would say it just shows how good both Alex Ferguson and Arsene Wenger were in management. Um, Arsenal are not the team they were. Man United aren't the team they were. Um, a lot of criticism has been thrown at the ownership of both clubs. Both got American investment. Transfer policy has been regularly questioned at both these clubs. Well, Van der Beek hasn't played very well, regardless. Obviously, playing at Ajax, playing for a dominant side, a different formation. Matic, he's a box-to-box midfielder. Matic is the engine room. Now, McTominay isn't a bad player. It's what is his best position. He's a young guy. Van der Beek's a young guy. There's clearly a confidence thing. It's obviously training as well. I'll tell you a lot. I think the bigger problem is, Fred is just. Oh, hmm, yeah, I got in trouble on a Facebook post about Fred. The worst Brazilian since Stevie Wonder shaved his wife's fanny. That was my post, and I got in trouble with my family. In regards to McTominay, not a bad player. Van der Beek, these are confidence guys. These are young players. They're developing their game. Obviously, in training is where things are shown. Obviously, if he's putting Fred in the team, there's a defensive aspect. Matic is a more universal midfielder, which can go forward quite a bit. It says to me that Solskjaer is concerned about the defence. A lot of criticism about Harry Maguire. I think a lot of it's warranted. There's a lot of mistakes there, but then again, the United. I mean, the United defence. I think most of the defences in the Premier League don't fill me with confidence, if I'm honest. I think the quality of football now, ironically, is not as good as what it was in the 90s when I obviously first started watching the sport. I do think the quality level now is a lot less than what it was. I think players are overcoached in attack. I like to see free-flowing attack where the players are given responsibility to read the game, find the space, make the run, use their footballing, spatial awareness, and intelligence. Defence is where you want to coach, and set plays. First and second phase of a set play, and then after that, again, if the ball turns over, get back in your defensive shape. You win the ball back. That's where you just need to play what's in front of you. Work out, is a player free to link up play, create. So I do think players are overcoached. I think, in my mind, the quality isn't as high as what it was in the mid to late 90s, early 2000s. I think there's too many generic type players who are all very, very similar. My favourite style of football is counter attack, and with counter attack, you just want free flowing attack. I don't think enough teams do that. You know, so yeah, in my opinion, yeah, the quality level is not as good. The fitness levels, I think, are better. I think obviously, fitness and sports science, diet, and the gym work have massively improved. On the flip token, though, you can be too fit, you can be too you know perfect, and that's where again the overcoaching, the fact that the pitches have changed. So even out in the lower leagues, are still playing on carpets. So the style of the game has changed, not necessarily for the better. Um, I will hasten that. Players and coaches now are complaining about, like, oh, there's a divot on the pitch. Oh, there's a little muddy patch. Whereas 20 years ago, it was like, oh, I can make a sliding tackle. Tackling as an art form is going out of the game. Physical man marking is going out of the game. The simulation or the diving is endemic, and players aren't getting punished for, well, rolling around like they've been shot. This is another reason why I prefer, rugby league, ice hockey, far more physical sports where players are actually playing hurt a lot of the time. Do you think it's the case that Ollie, who gets flack for not coaching well at all? Well, when you've got players like Pogba who generally, are a lead weight around the team because they're not team players, I don't think it matters who you put out on the field necessarily. It's the attitude of the players on the field, because he can coach brilliantly on the training ground, and then there's no performance on game day. And I think Solskjaer, he's very well spoken. He's very affable. He's very calm. He doesn't seem like one of those managers who's going to throw the toys out the pram and have a rant and a rave. He seems very measured. You know, I think there's obviously a lot of issues at play. Um, I'm not sure about the feeling within the dressing room. I think there's still a lot of scars from the Mourinho era. Um, I think Pogba may be very disruptive in that dressing room. I think it's a divided dressing room, if I'm honest. I think some of the transfers that Man United have made um, haven't been great. So, is that how much say does the manager have over transfer policy? Um, that's something to. I also think some of the social media stuff back in the day, like obviously the back page of the newspaper, the front page of the newspaper, if the social media stuff, some of it, I mean, that has an impact on players. It does. Um, it has a massive impact. Um, I think a lot of what we've seen in recent years, a lot of abuse these players cop. Yes, they're paid very, very well. Overpaid, we can agree. I think there's definitely, I think that's another issue. But there's a lot of issues there. I do think I don't think Pogba plays better for France. Look at the Euros; he was terrible. Had a few flashes, but wasn't great at the Euros. I don't think Pogba plays better for France. He's too much of an individual. He's not a team player. Um, I'm not even going to argue on that. He's not a team player. He thinks he's better than what he is. He's not consistent enough, in my opinion. Pogba. He's got the skill. It's his temperament. It's his ego. It's his attitude. And he had the same issue. I mean, there's a reason why Fergie got rid of him. Um, there's a reason why he was moved on to Juventus for cheap money. There's a reason why he left Juventus, and he's not very good tracking back. He's lazy. He's very inconsistent. When he's on form, when he's on it, and he's focused and he's playing well, he's brilliant. But he's just not consistent enough. There's an attitude there. There's an ego there. He spends more time changing his hairstyle every week and being on Instagram than doing his job, which is to be an attacking, creative midfielder and you know bring other players. But he's not a Patrick Vieira. He's not an Emmanuel Petit. So talk about French contemporaries that you can compare him to. You know, he can be good 1 minute in a game and terrible the next. If you look at the Euros and you rewatch those games, Griezmann is the box-to-box midfielder. Griezmann plays a very similar role to Pogba. He was the box-to-box midfielder in that tournament. He was the player in the French team putting all the effort in. And Pogba was terrible. Pogba was terrible in that tournament. Do I see Jose Mourinho coming back to the Premier League? I think he's quite happy at Roma. The results are showing that. Um, the Italian media and the Italian fans are different over there. It's his second spell in Italian football. Obviously, he had great success at Inter. I don't know. It's his time at Tottenham was disastrous. So that's the first time I don't think he's ever won a trophy at a club. So Tottenham is one of those clubs that's a poison chalice for managers. Same with Newcastle. No one wants the job. Who do I think is Liverpool's next manager after Klopp? Don't know. Klopp could be the next Arsene Wenger, the next Alex Ferguson. He could be there for as long as he wants. I think he's fully aware that he's not going to win every season, but I think he's going to be there a long time. I can't see the owners being unhappy with him. He's brought stability to the club. He's brought success to the club, won a lot of trophies in a very short space of time. I can't see Klopp going anywhere anytime soon. Same with, Guardiola. I think unless he wins the Champions League at Man City, I think he's gone. But I think Klopp is going to be Liverpool manager for most of the next decade. Better side Liverpool. Man United have been declining for quite some time. I would go with Liverpool, the better side there. Liverpool are the closest things for Man United on the third, I think. But I would say Arsenal under Wenger were equal to Man United under Ferguson. I mean, Wenger had A, less time at Arsenal, and B, he won more FA Cups than Fergie. So they balance each other out, those two managers. I think, Klopp, he does play an exciting brand of football with teams. For Germany, he has a sense of humour. I like his interviews. I like his interview style. He tries to have that relaxed style with the interviewers. Other managers have been very confrontational when it comes to their media commitments when they're on, being asked questions, and of course they are contractually obliged to do the media interviews. They face fines if they don't. I don't like that. I think if you want to give an interview, give one. If you don't, I think it's fair to say I just don't want to give an interview. I'm just going to give a brief statement. I don't want to take any questions. I want to deal with the team. But I would say, Klopp, Liverpool, as long as he wants. In terms of style, I think, yeah. I generally think that, yeah, Klopp has the ability to be ranked alongside Fergie and Wenger, but with the average tenure of a manager now being a lot less than what it was, and chopping and changing, um, we may not see that. But I can't see him leaving Liverpool anytime soon unless there's a serious, serious tipping form. And last season, you could argue was an aberration. Still, got them into the top four by the end of the season. Um, Man City under Pep, but he's had all the money. I can't see Man City being as good without the checkbook, because Pep's never had to coach with a reduced budget. There's a difference. Pep's never had to coach for a club that's been under financial difficulty, whereas Borussia Dortmund have had money problems. And I think when Klopp was coming along at Dortmund, they were coming out of their money issues, but they weren't out of the woods. They still had reduced budget to work under, and there's your difference. Personally, for me, and Klopp's managed at smaller clubs like Mainz, which no money, you know, and was pretty solid when he was there. So he learnt the hard way, playing, coaching for um, an underdog team, a team that's expected to get relegated, a team that's expected not to do very well, small budget, lesser quality players, and was pretty solid with them. So there's a reason there. Um, I wouldn't say there's a big difference in money. I mean, Dortmund are a big club, but they did have some financial difficulties at one point. But Klopp started out at Mainz, who are a much smaller club, much smaller budget, and did a reasonable job, and that's how he got the Dortmund job. He made sure that Mainz were as competitive as possible, and he learned his trade craft at a smaller club. Um, I think Liverpool have got big money. It's not They're a big brand. Dortmund, Dortmund is one. I think is the best supported club in Germany. They've got the biggest stadium in Germany. Everyone goes Bayern Munich, biggest club. No, the Westfalenstadion and Dortmund are actually the biggest club in Germany. But don't tell Munich fans that; they get a bit upset. Um, Dortmund, the fan base is big. They're a very consistent team. They have had money problems though. Yeah, I think there is definitely a culture problem with Man United. There's an entitlement there. They're living on past glories, which is a an issue there. Let's get this back. That's better. So, yeah, they're not performing as well as they could. Still a big name club, but the club is relying on former glories to attract players. And then you compare to what Leicester did, and in the last 5 years, they've won the FA Cup, Charity Shield, and Premier League. I mean, Liverpool Leicester win their first league title ever, get over their FA Cup bump, um, where they had a problem winning the FA Cup. Where been to all these finals and never won it. They get over that hump. Far less money, far less, wealth, and proved you can do it with the underdog. And while they've had an indifferent start to the season, they're still a very well run club. So it's not just about having the money; it's about being well run and having the right culture. And Leicester, in comparison to Man United, there seems to be a positive culture at Leicester where there's a no dickhead policy, and it's a unified dressing room policy where, like, we're in this together. You know, the media are saying it's a one-off, it's a miracle. Let's prove them wrong. Whereas clubs like Man City, there is definitely a culture issue. Yes, they are a winning team, but look how many of players have played there who've been charged for sexual offences. Mendy, Adam Johnson, there's some other player who's done some dodgy stuff there. I mean, Carl Walker is constantly misbehaving. There's clearly a entitlement at Man City culture and a rather unsavoury culture there. And, you know, yes, they're winning, but at what cost? And this is not a new debate. I've mentioned it with other sports as well. Look at the Melbourne Storm in the NRL. Several high-profile players there, Cameron Munster and Brandon Smith. They call it the white powder incident. No, it's cocaine, let's be honest. It might be amphetamines, but it's probably cocaine. There's clearly, they say they've got this no dickhead culture. This is not the first incident where recreational drug use and alcohol and misbehaviour has involved Melbourne Storm. There are several clubs that seem to have a very poor off-field culture, dressing room culture. And come over the Atlantic, go to North America with the NHL in the 80s and 90s. What has since transpired and come out was that several teams, maybe more widespread throughout the league, the Edmonton Oilers, the Red Wings, the Washington Capitals, there was a culture of recreational drug misuse. Now, you can argue, we should legalise, decriminalise, take them off the banned list, blah, 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 blah. At the moment, cannabis, cocaine, speed, they're on the ban list. And Grant Fuhr, Bob Probert, these were players thrown under the bus by the league. Didn't help that Grant Fuhr was mixed race and from a fostering background, so he had a very bad childhood. But they got caught, they got thrown under the bus. They resurrected their careers, but there's a lot of stories circulating, and when a lot of stories circulate, more likely than not, these rumours are true, but until they're proven, there's a lot of very strong rumours about a lot of players. And then you've got Jimmy Hayes, an ice hockey player, passed away a few weeks ago. And the autopsy revealed that, addiction, drug use contributed to his death. He was same age as me, I think he was 32, 33 years old. He in his system, he had cocaine and fentanyl. So there needs to be a reckoning when it comes to recreational drug use in professional sport. And I've done videos on it. They don't get many views. I find that surprising. I look at the amount of players that have been caught either by the testers or on video or out in public in regards to recreationals, drink driving, all that. And there's clearly, these are guys under a lot of pressure. A lot of them are in their own 20s, earning a lot of money. But I do think professional sport needs to look itself in the mirror and go, we have a problem. Arsenal won't in Liverpool, Chelsea, the main City players. If Arsenal won't instate their Man United will never get to the floor. United are quite lucky, actually. Arsenal, Spurs, no, have to agree there. Massively, no average teams not lower. Chelsea's the best club in the league based on winners and no messing around with players. I think Chelsea is the exception to the rule when it comes to replacing the manager constantly and still being successful. Tuchel proved that last season, winning the Champions League. Di Matteo, Benitez, their European trophies, for example, the league trophies as well. Says all you need to know. However, how long that model can continue being, implemented, we'll just have to wait and see, when that runs its course. And I wouldn't be surprised if at some point Abramovich decides to sell the club. You know, he's been there, I think, was it 17 years now? He's owned the team. I don't know how much longer Abramovich is going to be owning the club. He might decide enough's enough. I'm going to hand the reins over to someone else. It'll be interesting to see if and when he does sell. Um, but the Abramovich era has been a very successful period of time for Chelsea. Very dominant side. If you look at that trophies won, I would argue they're more dominant than Man City, Liverpool, Man United, Arsenal in that same period. Um, in the Abramovich era, only a couple of teams outside of the traditional Big Six have won the FA Cup. That'd be Portsmouth, Wigan, and Leicester. Although Leicester have actually won a few trophies in that period themselves, including the league. So you could argue Leicester are now part of the Big Six, Big Eight kind of top end of the table in regards to league, league position and such. I would argue yes. They've been the most consistent team. It's 17 years, I think, he's owned the team. Look, what we know about the situation in regards to those three clubs is they have massive financial problems. They're declining on the field. Their desperation to get this rival competition to the UEFA sanctioned competitions off the ground of the European Super League was clearly financially based. Nothing to do with us fans because they were all broke. I think Barcelona are in the worst state. People go on claiming, oh, he sucks as manager. Well, it doesn't matter who you've got as manager because, unfortunately, the obsession with Messi, 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 while he's one of the best players ever to grace the game, they didn't have enough of a supporting cast. The culture within the club was toxic. Their financial mismanagement almost probably is criminal. Wouldn't surprise me if there is some criminality involved in that. Same with Real Madrid, toxic club, toxic fan base. Kind of glad they're both struggling. Juventus, you know, I don't know. I don't know. I don't think necessarily finished. I think if there were any other club, they've gone out of business. They are global brands, obviously, very high standing within the game, but unfortunately, the mismanagement that we have seen. I think Juventus uh, are the least in trouble. If that makes sense, they're the least financially exposed. Um, But every other European football fan, doesn't matter what team you support, what league your team plays in, how good your team are, they're doing this. They're rubbing their hands with glee. There's a smug look on the face of many. Bearing in mind, Barcelona wanted to take a game to the US, a regular season game, which says to me that the money problems at Barca are going back a long time. The sale of Neymar, the money problems at Barca go back a long time. And when the Neymar transfer went through 2017, how long is this going to overinflated transfer market going to continue? When they wanted to take regular season games to the US, obviously money, because of their brand and their brand reach. How long is this going to continue? And then over here in the UK, we had a team going bust. Very. We're talking a mere 7 months before the COVID pandemic shut down global sport, shut down the global economy. And I said then in 2019, this bubble's bursting. Like, this is You know, clearly the cracks have appeared, and it doesn't matter what level of football you are at in the professional game. But that for me said, yeah, something's not right here. Something has gone horribly, horribly wrong. In regards to how these three clubs are going, Juventus didn't win Serie A last year. Barcelona, I think, won the Copa del Rey. Real Madrid won nothing. I don't think Juventus won anything last season. They finished fifth. So then they come up with this European Super League to try and save themselves because their league form hasn't been good enough, and they're panicking because they've got no money. Yet the players want their contracts honoured. They're not willing to take any more pay deferrals or pay cuts, obviously COVID notwithstanding. They're saying, nah, you've got to honour what we have legally signed. So the clubs have got themselves in this position over many, many years. And well, technically they finished fifth because joint third, it comes down to goal difference. I mean, they might be joint third, but they were fifth. It's goal difference is decided as the first tiebreaker and then other tiebreakers. Yeah, okay, they won a trophy, didn't win the league. And if you look at the Italian team that won the Euros, there were players from Lazio, Sassuolo, Roma, Fiorentina, Inter, AC. There were players from lots of clubs in the Italian league system, which says to me that it's becoming more competitive. And Juventus falling back to the group and the league becoming more competitive again, in the long run, is better for Italian football, personally. Um, I swear they came fifth. Goal difference. Goal difference. And then it comes down to, and I think wins and defeats and draws, they all work. I don't know how the tiebreakers work, but I swear they came fifth. And good, because to be fair, they deserve to not win. But the fact that like Atalanta are now basically a top four, top five team in Italian football regularly is a good thing. And their style of play, I like their style of play. I have a soft spot for Atalanta. You know, I think I'm not sure how easy it's going to be for Juventus to get back to winning the title. I think it's now a much more competitive league, and that has benefited the Italian national squad. In regards to Real Madrid and Barcelona, two very bad run clubs. They've you know been mismanaged for a very, very long time. And I think it's now coming hard. I think the money bubble has started to burst a little bit. I'm not so sure, how much longer football can sustain itself on the current player wages, the current transfer market, and fans have said enough's enough in recent years. Like they're starting to run out of patience, generally speaking. the, going to a football match now is. I mean, I've got some of my old tickets and old programs where me and my granddad between us for 20 quid, £20, 2 tickets. Yeah, he was a pensioner and I was technically a teenager, so I got a teenager's ticket. To do that today, twice, 3 times as much. So there's a reason why I haven't been to a football match in a very, very long time. And I have been to Premier League and Championship games. I've been to the FA Cup. I've gone to lower division games as well. And I've enjoyed, watching the sport when I was younger. I don't enjoy it as much now. I know, obviously, football is the Italian national sport. It's the most popular sport in Italy, uh, much like here in England. A lot of media coverage, big TV deal, big name clubs that have great history within the sport. National side that's won everything. But look at the amount of empty seats at games. Look at the infrastructure of stadiums. They're not looking great. That tells you something about the state of the game. There's a lot of empty seats at games. Do I see any way back? Well, interesting question. Very interesting question. In what regard do I see a way back? Because in the last 2 decades, well, I'm going to say 15 years, well, yeah, since the financial crash, football has been very unevenly balanced when it comes to the finances. Um, and I would, I would, yeah, I would say that it depends on what question and how you're saying. Do I see a way back? I think in order for there to be a rebalancing and a fair rebalancing of the sport, I understand why Alexander Serafin has decided to get the brains trust around and look at restructuring the European club competitions. I completely understand that. I think what they come up with isn't necessarily the right way to do it, but I understand why he did it. I do believe he's the right guy to lead UEFA forward at this time. He's not part of the Old Boys Club. I think he's Slovenian, if I'm correct. He might be Slovakian. He's one of those up and coming nations in a sense, some of those smaller European nations. Um, I would definitely say that my way of restructuring European club football was to go back to the format we had in the 90s, where there was no group stages in the Champions League and Europa League, and you had the Cup Winners' Cup and there were straight knockout tournaments. Yet the big clubs, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Juventus, etc., argued for more money, and they argued for the group stages, where we see a lot of pointless games that are just dead rubbers completely. Um, and they're just and then you have this argument of fixture congestion. So the people who run the clubs want as much money as possible, but the managers are going, "We're playing too many games. Player welfare, like we're struggling to get players fit and keep them from getting fatigued, getting injured. You know, we've got to, and and, and that in itself is UEFA have also chased the money. The fact that the European club games, at least in the UK, at least, are all on subscription TV now. Apart from the Champions League and Europa League finals, is a massive problem. And when you've got Perez coming out, or young people aren't interested in the game anymore, you've taken it away from us. Our average salaries in terms to in the last 10, 15 years, they haven't grown as fast. A lot of people have had pay freezes for a long time or pay cuts. And this predates COVID. So there's been a lot of criticism thrown at the broadcasters across Europe. The French TV deal was pretty much collapsed. So, and I think we've reached a peak with what the broadcasters can, so, the broadcast deals have reached their maximum level. I think they're going to plateau now for a while unless something significantly changes. If we're talking about European football, the amount of overseas money, which has then meant changes of fixture times to suit the US or Asia markets, which again have really pissed off fans. And kickoff times are changed to suit TV schedules for the non-European market. Club ownership's another big talking point. So how do I see a way back? I think there's too much money in the sport. It's not distributed correctly or evenly. A minority of clubs are holding too much power within the game, and fans don't have enough of a voice. I think they're starting to be heard now. Unfortunately, we're at a state of play where I think the most logical solution is we'll see how this Champions League new format when it comes in, and the European formats when they come in, how they play out over the next couple of seasons, assess how good or bad they are. UEFA, I think, have signed a minimum length for the TV rights on the new format. We may see a positive response to that or a negative response to that. A lot of fans are undecided. A lot of fans are still undecided on the European Nations League. I know it's got rid of a lot of pointless friendlies. I think there's a better way to fixture international football, qualification for tournaments and tournaments themselves. I'm not a big fan of FIFA's proposal for a 2-year World Cup cycle. There was a reason why the Winter Olympics went from a 2 to 4 year cycle. Because having it so regularly on such a major international event devalues the event. I know other sports like ice hockey do a yearly cycle on the World Championships, but there's always a qualification, promotion, relegation style with IIHF. But rugby league and rugby union, we've got a 4-year cycle for our World Cups. Cricket, 4-year cycle for that World Cup. Olympics, both winter and summer, again 4-year cycles. I think, it will devalue the competition. It's not going to happen overnight because we've got another couple of World Cups lined up before that, if it is enacted, would kick in. The next World Cup after Qatar is a 3-way World Cup between Mexico, Canada, and the US, and they're expanding the tournament. So to have it every 2 years, but then you pretty much devalued the regional tournaments like the Euros, like the Gold Cup in North and Central America and the Caribbean. African Cup of Nations is every 2 years, but that also links into how they qualify for the World Cup, if that makes sense. The South American Cup of Libertadores, that's every 4 years, not every 2 years, because there's less nations involved. So, what happens to the Confederations Cup? I don't think we're having it in Qatar, actually. I want to it be our first time ever, which would be interesting. How I would change things, I think a salary cap in European football has got to happen at some point. At the moment, Italy are one of the favourites, yes. If we're going by the form book and how they're playing, that's not taking into consideration the conditions. I think we could see an outsider possibly win the tournament. I think it's going to be a very unpredictable tournament. While I did predict Italy to win the Euros, got a prediction right, which rarely happens. I get a prediction correct, by the way. But I predicted the Italians to win the Euros. If we're going by the form guide and how they're playing under Mancini and the style of play, the players he's selecting, he's playing players in their strengths. The attack is not unstructured, but there's a lot of flair involved in there, a lot of pace. Solid defensive core, very, very bright, young, attacking, going forward. Defensively, veteran, solid, and their style of play suits the balance. It's a very balanced side. Doesn't matter where the World Cup is. You take where the location is. Yes, Italy are definitely one of the favourites going into the tournament. However, because it's played in a very non-traditional location, because of where it is being played, the actual geography, the actual climate of Qatar, which is a desert climate. It'll be very hot in the day, very cold at night. And if a game is on the cusp of kicking off in the early evening when the sun's going down, there will suddenly be a very warm to very cold. So it'll be interesting to see how teams adapt to the climatic conditions in the Middle East. Italians, I mean, Atalanta came close 12 months ago. Inter, obviously, um, like, there or thereabouts. I think they can win it within the next couple of seasons, let alone the next 10 years. I think they could, an Italian side could win it sooner than that. Um, with the way like Atalanta play their style, and the resurgence of AC Milan, Napoli being in the conversation, yeah, I can see it highly likely. Um, the league has become more competitive. Um, so in that regard, yes, I can see it happening a lot sooner than 10 years time. But again, it all depends on direction the sport as a general takes, and how the new format, when it does come in a couple of years time, how that affects squad rotations, domestic league competitions, how that new format works, and who adapts to the new format very the best, basically. Um, I'm not sure how that format's going to work with football. It may work with other sports, but Juventus, we'll see what happens with Juventus. Personally, I think um, I think yeah, I think yeah, it's all about how they bounce back this season. Disappointing year last year. The amount of speculation over this European Super League, the press, I think that's got to be very distracting for the players, the managers. You know, that's fired up a lot of other teams. It's motivated a lot of other teams. Um, right now, I feel the money I'm putting Paris in England. Previously, Spain. I think Spanish football's in crisis. I mean, Atletico Madrid are a very good side, but other historical clubs in Spain, like Athletic Bilbao, who actually are historically very successful, have had a very lean period. With what's happening with Barca and Real Madrid, I mean, and Valencia as well have had money problems. So it's big name teams in Spain. There is crisis in Spanish football. There's no doubt on that. It will be very interesting to see how this year's Champions League plays out. Uh, how the English sides do in both the Champions League and Europa League, um, and how that also impacts their domestic league form. Same with Italian football. French football has declined. It is now the sixth ranked league, not the fifth ranked, not one of the top five. Portugal has overtaken them, which is good. It just shows how uncompetitive that league is. Um, well, I have not watched any club football so far. I'm looking forward to the first round of the FA Cup, because that's just, you know, I love the cup competition, straight knockout, little underdog versus the bigger team in the early first round with the non-league or the lower league side playing. Same with the third round. Um, this is the FA Cup is something I do enjoy watching, because you get the non-league team or the lower league team playing the higher ranked league team, and it's a one-off game. Um, Most historical competition in football, broadcast all over the world. Um, is one of the reasons why, one of the big reasons why a lot of fans have been brought to the game. Kids have decided to play the game. They watch it on TV. I want to do that. Big draw for over. I mean, any player who worth their salt, any manager who's worth their salt in the game, always states that at some point, they watched the FA Cup final. Bit different over in the US, and Canadian market. But in recent years, when I've been watching, NHL broadcasts, for example, they're advertising Premier League games. They're advertising Championship games. They're advertising some other European league games like Serie A, and La Liga, and the Bundesliga, and the French league, and the Portuguese league. Bear in mind, there's a big Latino community in Texas, California, New Mexico, Arizona, Florida. Big Central American community. Some of the best Mexican players have played in Europe. Some of the best South American players obviously play in Europe, even historically. So, and there's that strong Hispanic link in the US. Obviously, there's a lot of American money in the European game, primarily in England, but also in across the game. So we'll see how it all plays out. I think the North American MLS is building its history, and people were very dismissive of the MLS, going, well, it's a retirement league for European players. I never try and compare leagues based on quality per se. Rugby league, I do, because I believe the NRL is that step ahead. Doesn't mean I don't enjoy watching the Challenge Cup when I do watch it. It was this season I didn't watch it this season. But I've watched all but I think 2 Challenge Cup finals since I was 3 years old. I don't try and compare the MLS to the European leagues. I think it's a fun watch. I think it's a fun product. It's a rapidly growing league. The game itself, the sport itself, is growing rapidly in the US and Canada. More kids are playing the game. Collegiate level at the NCAA, there's now they're what they call soccer. Collegiate levels. It's kids getting scholarships based on their footballing ability. It's classed as one of the big 6 if you count the CFL as well, for professional leagues. It's the 5th biggest team sport in the US and Canada. It's obviously behind the big 4. It's a solid 5th. And then below that, you've obviously got Major League Rugby and the North American Rugby League, which is starting up. But the MLS has been going now since 1996. Some big name players have played in the US since then, who are world-class superstars. There's no denying that. A lot of them were near the end of their careers when they went over there. But because these big name players went over there, they managed to sell the product to the wider audience. So they were household names. People knew who David Beckham was. They knew who Kaká was. Zlatan Ibrahimovic. I mean, come on. I think he's had the biggest impact. Even Gerrard's played over there. Frank Lampard's played over there. Pirlo finished his career in New York. Thierry Henry's played over there. Bradley and Sean Phillips have played over there. While they're not the biggest name players, they're still high-profile players in England. There's a big US expat community over here, who, if they're sports fans and their family and friends over in the US are sports fans, they will talk about it. I think social media has helped with the growth of the sport, especially when you have like European-based players over there. Jose Mourinho would never go to Juventus, Liverpool, Man City. I don't know with you, Mourinho. Personally, I think people saying it will be a disaster. I don't know. What do you think will happen to Man City after Pep leaves? Well, Pellegrini and Mancini won trophies before he was there. I don't think they suddenly drop out the top four. I don't know. I don't know how long Pep's going to stay there. And with the amount of negative headlines that are coming out about players misbehaving, getting arrested, with Mendy this time, Kyle Walker, there's clearly an issue within that dressing room, within that club, of a toxic negative culture. And some ex-players have been critical of some of Guardiola's methods, and a lot of fans will say, "Well, he's never had to coach without a budget, so he's always had money." Um, so you know, in that regard, um, you know, I think. Well, I think in Guardiola's first season they were eighth, so I think they didn't do very well in his first season there. But I think I'm not sure. Well, I wouldn't say Chelsea and Liverpool were the only title contenders. I mean, Leicester proved that anything's possible, and then I think Leicester have had an indifferent start to this season. They had an indifferent start last season. Um, there was one. I think it was it last season or the season before they were actually ahead of where they were when they won the league. So I think don't ever discount Leicester. Don't discount Everton under Benitez. I wouldn't discount them for upsetting things a little bit. West Ham under David Moyes has been a revelation. He seems to be a manager reborn. Um, he's got players playing as a team. West Ham look dangerous. They could mix things up in the top four, top five. Um, so I think it's a more competitive. And now with Newcastle with money, I wonder what the league's going to look like in a year or two's time. I think Newcastle need to rebuild. They need to reset. They need to restructure themselves. First things foremost, if Newcastle can survive relegation, then they could do a Leicester. Imagine Newcastle doing a Leicester. That is something that is actually highly plausible. Leicester avoided relegation on the last day of the season before they won. Next season, they go on this just run and they win because they were the best team in 2016. So if Newcastle can avoid relegation this season, stabilise themselves, make the right transfers in the offseason, get the right culture within the club, imagine if Newcastle are Leicester City. God, fans will lose their minds. But I look on social media and there's a lot of negativity towards Man City. There's a lot of negativity to the fact that the Etihad, they never sell out. There's always empty seats, and Guardiola has been criticised for some of his comments in regards to the empty seats at games. Doesn't matter if it's in the Champions League, Europa League, depending on how they do in the European competitions or in the league itself. The Etihad is called the empty Etihad for a reason. They pump fake crowd noise in to create atmosphere. Um, yeah. um, I think Man City has still failed to win a Champions League with all that money, same as PSG. All this money can't win the trophy they want to win, the Evo Prize. And the fact that they're it's PSG, Man City, and now Newcastle are basically state-owned teams. What I find funny and very hypocritical of the Premier League clubs is they were more than happy to take the takeover of Man City and but they tried to block the takeover of Newcastle. I don't understand that. It reeks of double standards and self you know I that's where I think that the process of club ownership and takeovers needs to be fully transparent and simplified, and then stricter questions have to be asked. There's too many question marks about club ownership. There was no one complaining when PSG were bought by basically the Qatar government. There was no question marks raised when Man City were bought by the UAE government, pretty much. but everyone's losing their minds over the Saudi government having a public investment fund and taking over Newcastle. Oh, the human rights record. Well, no one complained about the other two clubs. Ironically, who've never won the Champions League. So it's just the irony that money doesn't buy you everything. Um, I would say I don't know who they've got lined up. I've gone through the list of managers that are linked with the job. Three of them are currently out of work, so there's no get out clause for them. Um, Others have ruled themselves out. Based, I mean, Rafa Benitez said if the takeover had been completed last year, I would have happily gone. Had it been completed before the start of the season, I'd have happily gone. But Everton came calling and offered me a deal, and well, I love the city of Liverpool, so I couldn't say no. So Rafa Benitez, I think, had Amanda Staveley's initial takeover bid 4 years ago not collapsed, Benitez would still be manager of Newcastle. That's the irony of it. They want to get Benitez. They want Amanda Staveley wants Benitez as manager, but because of this protracted saga over the last 4.5 years, 4 years, whatever it is, he's gone. He's gone to a Premier League rival. Steve Bruce comes in, faces the same challenges and problems that Rafa had with the lack of investment, the uncertainty over who's going to own the club. Difference being, fans love Rafa, fans hate Bruce. But they did pretty much exactly the same job, the similar tools, lack of support from the owner, uncertainty over their futures as manager, uncertainty in regards to is there going to be a takeover. Steve Bruce, obviously, there is a takeover. He manages his 1,000th game. I think they weren't going to sack him before he got that milestone. I think they were a little bit of class there. He decides to leave on his terms, but the vitriol he has faced since getting that job has been nothing short of disgusting. Well, I've done a video on Steve Bruce's managerial career when he was appointed manager of Newcastle, and some of the comments on that were leaving me going, Jesus Christ, he's gonna just cop it. And his son, who used to play for at Hull, said, yeah, he's taking a massive toll on him, and this was last season. He's taking a massive toll on him. And I think I'm not sure Steve Bruce stays. I think Steve Bruce might retire from management altogether. He may take a break and then try and go back into it. But it'll be interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, it will be interesting to see, like, again, who gets the job and how much time they're given. The statement's been released by Amanda Staveley. They want stability. They want to restructure the club. They know it's going to be a long process. The fans need to understand it's going to be a long process. I think the new owners are aware it's not going to happen overnight. But we'll see what happens. I think Chelsea's the exception rather than the rule when it comes to managerial stability. I'm not sure how long the Chelsea model of win at all costs, win every season is going to last. I feel sorry for some of the players at Chelsea having these constant changes in style, direction, management. I think that does actually harm long-term development of some of their younger players coming through. Because each manager that's coming has had a different style of play, alters the tactics, alters the philosophy. So in that regard, I'm not sure how the Chelsea model is going to be sustainable, but it's sustained for 17 years. I think it's only been 3 seasons where they haven't won silverware or something like that. They pretty much won silverware almost every season or nearly every season. And I don't know how long that can be sustained. In saying that, we'll see what happens with Newcastle. It's a watch this space kind of situation now. It'll be just interesting to see who they get in. There's some big name managers who may go there. Um, oh God, go away, TikTok. Um, but as I say though, I mean the I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in the transfer market this January, and it'll be very interesting to see what their final league position is and what they do in the summer. I think the summer's going to be more telling than what they do in January. That's my personal opinion in regards to um, what will happen going forward. I fear that they may do too much in the January window in offloading players and bringing players in. Um, that could be very unsettling. I think they need to have stability. I think one or two transfers um, and in and out. I think they need a veteran player in midfield. I think they don't score enough goals. That's key. But I also think since Colaccini's left the club defensively, they're not sound. They need a leader at the back, a leader in midfield, and a guy up front who actually isn't goal shy. Like Joelinton hasn't worked. He's not adapted. Um, he's not adapted very well to the English game. He's not adapted well to things. However, it'll be interesting if a new manager and a new style of play actually does suit him. This is where he suddenly comes alive. And it'd be interesting to see if a manager has faith in him, a positive change. Do you think so many signings? Um, well, I think what I would personally say is I don't think you should actually cap the amount of transfers the club does. I think the transfer windows possibly they need to change how that's structured. Um, that's just personal opinion on the structure of the transfer windows, where you have an off-season window that actually then completes after the start of the season, and then a January mid-season window. I think that needs addressing. I think when players suddenly get cup tied, I think that rule needs to go completely. Um, I I don't know. Maybe you should just have a summer transfer window and that's it. That's your squad for the season. Um, we'll have to see what happens. But Leicester proved that if you're very shrewd in the transfer market, get the right manager and the right culture in place, anything's possible. And the culture has stayed at Leicester. They have this no dickhead policy. They are everyone seems to buy into the system. I think they've got the right manager in Brendan Rodgers. Obviously, Ranieri got them there. They made some missteps along the way. They learned from their mistakes very very quickly. They kept a good leadership core there. And there's a reason why they've won a fair bit of silverware since 2016. In regards to Newcastle, they've been mismanaged off the field for a long time. They've not been close to winning any silverware for a long time. A lot of the issues predate Mike Ashley. Let's be clear on that. In 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 regards, you say it will take 2 3 years. Sometimes all it takes is a change of manager and a couple of signings to suddenly turn a situation around. I think their squad is weak. I do think it's going to take several transfer windows and a lot of patience. They need to get some confidence first and foremost. They need to win their next game. They need to get a result in the next couple of games. They need to go on a little run, build some confidence because there's some teams around them that aren't playing well as well. Watford have obviously, on their billionth manager in a year because Watford change a manager every few months. And Watford is another side that I think will struggle. they constantly change management quite regularly, and I don't understand, that managerial model. I don't like it. I think that's something that football needs to look at, is the constant revolving door of management. Um, I think that's where football becomes a little bit ridiculous. Like, but there's no rule against having. I think Watford's case, I think they one season they had like 3 or 4 managers in the season. There's no rule against that. I just don't think it's necessary. It just shows poor ownership, and it doesn't breed stability. It doesn't develop players. It doesn't. Yeah, it generally means your team is not going to be successful for a long time. And to be fair, Chelsea have started to stabilise in their management average tenure, because Mourinho had 2 lengthy spells at the club, and Conte had more than one season. It distorts the average managers per season, which is about a season, 2 seasons, about 18 months is your average tenure of a Chelsea manager. Um, Watford is about 10 days. A joke, of course, but um, under Mike Ashley, Newcastle had a lot of managers as well. It's only in the last 2 managers there's been a bit of consistency, with Benitez and Bruce having more than a season or 2. And but I fear that there may be some reactionary transfer buys by Newcastle. I think whoever comes in has got to do his due diligence on the playing group that he has, the squad that he has, work out where the weaknesses are. Defence, I think, is and goal scoring, and I think there's weaknesses in every sector of the field. I think they need one centre back, possibly 2. Bit of experience at the back. I think they need an experienced midfielder who can raise the energy levels of the players around him, and they need a centre forward who's not scared of hitting the target, and someone to raise the confidence of Joelinton. He is a confidence player. I think he's lacking in that. Um, I think he needs someone alongside him to help him out, form a partnership. He might find a new lease of life with a new manager. Um, but there's clearly a lack of confidence amongst a lot of the players there. Um, and of course, you've got a passionate fan base like that. That's an intimidating. St James's Park is an intimidating atmosphere. Regardless of how the team is doing, there's always an atmosphere there. And when you're low on confidence as a player, you feel that. Um, you do. But we'll see what happens. Like, do I feel sorry for Steve Bruce? A little bit, but he hasn't been given the support of the ownership. The writing was on the wall as soon as the takeover was completed. Like, I think they were going to allow him his final game, win or lose, and then he was going to leave by mutual consent. Um, I do have a fair bit of sympathy for him. It was a hide into nothing. Whoever got the job was going to have the same problems Rafa had in regards to transfer budget or lack of. The uncertainty over will the club be sold. There are question marks. Will Mike actually ever sell the club? Will he ever find a buyer? And then COVID hits, and then the process gets drawn out. A lot of criticism aimed at the Premier League and the other Premier League clubs. The hypocrisy of these human rights groups who raise no questions when Chinese and Dubai money and Qatari money and money from some very dodgy sources has been coming into the game for decades. Suddenly there are sources, concerns about the Saudi takeover because it's a popular country to dislike because of how restrictive Saudi policy is domestically on its own people and its, some of its laws and restrictions and such. But there was no complaining when PSG was bought. There was no complaining when Chinese money was pumped into. There was no complaining when Russian oligarchs bought Bournemouth and Chelsea and where was this outrage in the last 20 years? Hasn't existed. Suddenly it exists. And the media's perpetuated it somewhat. Um, so yeah, the process about club ownership and who's in charge of what and the transparency of the process, yeah, have been raised. Um, and I would also say to fans, be careful what you wish for as well. Be very careful what you wish for, because look at the Glazers. Yeah, Man United have won a lot of silverware. Okay, they haven't won the league since Ferguson, but they've won a lot of silverware under the Glazers. But the Glazers have just asset stripped the club financially and have saddled the club with a lot of debt. And it, it's one of them. I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm the king of sports. I wouldn't go that far. I need a fair few more subscribers to call myself that. I'm not on that level yet. Be nice to have some more subscribers. So if you have any friends who are interested in sports discussion, get them to subscribe. It is really handy dropping that in there. I do need to stop smoking. A vice that I can't quit. But I wouldn't call myself the king of sports. I need a lot more subscribers. So if you have any friends who are interested in sport or any subscribers of your channels, get them to have a look. I will be doing a match review of the England France Rugby League International on Saturday. So if you've got any friends who are interested in sport, subscribers, get them to have a little look. I want to grow the channel. I do. Uh, you know, it it is what it is. I think on the rugby league side of things, as rugby league history has now joined the chat, I would say that the World Cup being delayed by a year, we should be watching the Rugby League World Cup right now. You know, no, I don't. I don't. No, I'd rather just watch and then review. Because of the setup I've got, it it's not something that I like doing. Because then I'll be distracted from what I'm watching. Um, the joys of having ADHD, provisional diagnosis, but I rather watch and dissect the game, watch the game, take my notes, um, absorb that match, that motor race, that individual. Let's say it's tennis, which I don't watch as much as I used to. But when it comes to rugby league, rugby union, football, um, I'd rather watch the match, break it down, take my notes, and then discuss my viewpoint, how I think the game went, what was good, what was bad, what could be improved. Watch alongs, other channels do it, but they have they have multiple screens, they have like their own studios. I don't have that kind of setup. I don't have space for that kind of setup. Obviously, I have at the moment. I'm an agency worker, but I did have like a full-time job, so I've got to balance like a work life with this. I mean, if this was making the money, and my flat was a tidy and had less crap in it, I will admit there's a lot of crap in my flat. My flat is a mess. If I had a bit more space, and the channel was making more views, making money, then yeah, it's worth the investment. But watch alongs, I think each channel different. Other channels do that. I like being different. I like because I cover more than one sport. If I'm just watching like rugby league or rugby union or football, you know, I will be watching some of the Winter Olympics if I can. Not everyone's going to be interested in that sport I'm watching, and that then limits the viewership. if you get what I mean, as well. Because not everyone is interested in rugby league. Not everyone is interested in rugby union. Not everyone is interested in. Ironically, not everyone's interested in football, or soccer. Because obviously I've got subscribers from the US and Canada. Not everyone's interested in ice hockey. Not everyone's interested in motorsport. So because I cover a lot of sports, not every viewer or subscriber is necessarily interested in the other sport. If you know what I mean. So I've got to balance that out and be fair. Um, but yeah, I do my match reviews and all that, and they are exceptionally interesting when you do them. You know, uh, and 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 I think. Well, I haven't watched any of the European, Champions League or any of those games, so I only do reviews on matches that I watch because if I haven't watched the game, I can't give my representation or my views on what I've seen. Um, and so therefore, it's just I'm going off what a journalist has written, or social media responses to an incident or to a game. And I watched nearly every Euros game. I think I missed a couple. I didn't review all of them. There was some personal issues that I was dealing with as well at the time, and some health problems that I've been dealing with. Um, so, in regards to match reviews on recent Champions League games, I haven't watched them. I don't have BT Sport, so as a British viewer, I don't have BT Sport, and I don't particularly like using illegal streams if I'm really honest, because my antivirus doesn't like that and tends to spack out and do crazy stuff, and then my laptop does some crazy stuff, doesn't like some of the streams that are out there and the torrents. I just do match reviews on what I see. I mean, if like a manager gets sacked or there's a serious incident, then I will try and find footage of that incident and break down what I've seen and how I think. Like the Jan Vertonghen head injury a couple of years ago, question marks were raised over the concussion protocols and injury protocols that are in place. I did a video on that. And what we're seeing with this CTE lawsuits, and research into head injuries. Yeah, I will. If there's like a dirty hit in a rugby match or a suspension or some controversy, I will, you know, have a look at some of the footage, break down, in my opinion, um, what I think's happened. I've noticed that I'm less reactionary when it comes to incidents now than what I was. That's my neighbour coming in the block of flats. Yeah, so the walls here aren't very thick. You hear everything. And now you're going to hear him go up the stairs, which is right above my head. And then you're going to hear his door slam because this block of flats is horrible. So noisy. Um, I would say Italy in 2020 were far more dominant than Portugal in 2016. Portugal were very lucky to win that tournament. They didn't really play very well. Italy, complete opposite. They played very well, adapt to the challenges of a pan-European tournament. Uh, you know, their style of play was, I think, superior to every other team. I think they were the best team to play in that tournament. Deserved winners. Portugal limped through the group stage with the third place teams. Going through to the next round, which is why I'm not overly keen on the current format of the Euros. While I'm happy with an expansion of the Euros, the current format means you can be a pretty poor side and get through to the next round. And Portugal very lucky to get through to the knockout stages of Euro 2016. Ronaldo wasn't the reason they won because he wasn't on the field at the time, which says something. But yeah, like yeah, in regards to like doing watch-alongs, the sound would have to be off, and I like the sound on when I'm watching live sport. Don't ask me why. Can't watch it in silence. Um, in regards to my setup, it's just not compatible really. I like watching the game, writing my notes down, then discussing and breaking down what has occurred. Because not everyone gets to watch the game. A lot of people are at work, for example. Obviously, depending on time zone and where people are in the world, they're not able to watch. Um, so it gives my opinion. I mean, obviously, people can disagree with that. I think my history with Welsh Rugby Union fans would dictate that. Dictate that. Um, but you know, it is what it is. So you know, it is. I've got the messages going off now. Yeah, in that kind of regard, when like a tournament like the Euros or the Rugby League World Cup, the Rugby Union World Cup, obviously I try and watch as many games as possible, and of course I've well, while obviously football globally, soccer if you are in US and Canada is obviously the most popular global sport. It's not my favourite, and there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of reasons why I enjoy the game less now than what I did 10, 15 years ago. Um, there's a lot of reasons why I prefer rugby league, ice hockey, certain forms of motorsport. That's crucial. Um, but again, that then also limits the viewership. So I've got to balance it out. But yeah, no, if things have gone perfectly, we should be watching the Rugby League World Cup right now. And I think the weather conditions as they are, they're changeable at the moment. There's a storm front coming in, still reasonably warm for the late October in Europe. Um, it hasn't actually been the weather hasn't actually been that bad. Considering we had snow very late this year in April. Yeah, it was snowing, mid-April. Um, the summer, we've had a decent summer, very decent summer. I've basically had my window open until literally the last week or so. From I think last week of April, first week of May, I opened my window. I haven't actually shut it until about a week ago. So the weather's been very, very good. So mate, if the weather's like this next year when the World Rugby League World Cup's on, that's going to be very, very interesting. Um, but the Rugby Union World Cup 2 years ago in Japan um, was 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 brilliant, and that was one of the best tournaments I've seen. So I think what I enjoyed this summer's Euros, and I know it was a season later, so some players wouldn't have had a chance otherwise. They wouldn't have made the squad because they would have still been on the under 21s. They had that extra season of club football, which has helped them. So that made things interesting. Do I see? Can Chelsea go back to back Champions League? It's very hard to win consecutive titles in any competition, in any sport. It's very, very hard to go back to back. It was easier in the past, um, but with the competitiveness in the sense that a lot of the big teams are closer together now. You know, because it's a pan-European competition, you've got to factor in squad rotation with your domestic league games, and European football is one of them. When you start the season, not only are you in European Cup competitions like Europa League and Champions League, you've got your domestic league and domestic cup competitions. So if you're competing on multiple fronts, um, if you're in the running for a league title, if you're in the running, for like a domestic cup, be it a domestic league cup or FA Cup, depending on the country, it makes it harder. Um, you've got to play that many more games than a team that's solely focused on having a cup run in the FA Cup. So Leicester figured that one out, where their league title challenge faded and their league position faded, but they got some silverware at the end of the season because they worked out, okay, the league's out of reach, but we've got a very good chance of getting some silverware. Um, it's very tough to do. Have they got the right guy to do it in Tuchel? He's known to be a very difficult character to work with, in the sense of the coaching side and the recruitment side of things, and dealing with the board on the pitch. Players love playing for him. Off the field and away from the training field, he is known to be a very prickly character. Has a certain methodology um, behind things. This happened at PSG. It happened at Dortmund. Um, so we'll see how his relationships with the board and scouts and the off field stuff work out. But if you know, looking at how they've started the league season, they look dangerous. It's all about balancing out domestic commitments with European commitments, and it's very hard to do. Very hard to do. Not impossible. It's very very difficult to do. But they've been very shrewd in the transfer market. Lampard, ironically, left them with a good foundation going forward, with bringing forward through a lot of the young players. Um, so he, he's, he's inherited some good players. They're young, they're willing to learn. He's got some good veterans there. Mendy in goal is one of the best goalkeepers at the moment in form. So he's got a very good goalkeeping tandem. Kepa, temperament with him, but Mendy, very underrated goalkeeper. Um, his stats are outstanding to start the season. Kepa on his day, brilliant goalkeeper. Temperament is a bit of a question mark. He's a bit of a fiery character, but it looking at their defence and how they're defending, good mix of veterans and young players, solid depth. Um, I can see them giving it a good go. Whether they can is something else entirely. It's very very difficult to win consecutive titles in a competition, especially when, as European football is very different to other professional leagues where you're fighting on multiple fronts. In professional sports, I think rugby league in Super League, obviously you've got the Challenge Cup and the Super League. So in that regard, that's the only similarity I can think of. Rugby union as well has a similar sort of format with European competitions, domestic competitions, and domestic league competition. But it is very, very difficult to retain a title in club sport. Very, very difficult. Not impossible though. A fair few teams have done it in recent years. Tampa Bay Lightning in the NHL, the Melbourne Storm have done it at one point. The Sydney Roosters did it back to back a couple of years ago. Just getting to back finals in a competition is hard enough. So we'll see how they do. It's not outside the realms of possibility. Best young English player? No, not Foden. Not for me. I think there's a good group of young players at the current time. I do think a lot of them are overrated, unfortunately. But the question mark with Foden is, does he get enough game time at club, and is he played in the right position for country? Um, that would be my criticism of that. That's not to say he's a bad player, not at all. Um, but I think there's a good crop of youngsters across the league right now, um, who all deserve a mention. There were some who didn't go to the Euros that I think should have. Ward-Prowse, for example, is a prime is a player of note who's very, very key for Southampton. Um, Jude Bellingham is showing a lot of really bright signs. Trent Alexander-Arnold, when he's fit, is probably one of the best wing backs in the game. I do think there is too many. There's a good young crop coming through at the same time, all at the same time, and yeah, that one for me is a difficult one because there's some other players who played in the lower divisions. You've got Bamford, for example, who didn't go to the Euros, Ward-Prowse. So there's a fair few young or underrated players. I think it's a better way to look at it. I wouldn't say just young players, underrated players. Because Jamie Vardy's still banging the goals in for Leicester, but he's retired from international football. How different would it have been if Vardy was still playing for England? And he's in his 30s. So for me, there's a good crop of players who come through at the same time. Plus, there are some players who work the hard way to get to the top level. And Jamie Vardy staying as solid as he is in his mid-30s is how many more seasons has he got in? I would say 2 at max. But anyway, well, there's still been question marks about the amount of game time and the amount of games he gets at Man City, considering the squad depth there and the strength of that team. I wouldn't say he's the finished article. I think there are some other good young players around. There's a lot of good young players around. And there's some players that have failed to live up to the expectation of bursting onto the team and sustaining that level. And a lot of them play for Tottenham, I reckon, or have played for Tottenham. But there's some other good players who are, in my mind, are still like youngsters, but they're not. Like, it's really weird. Like Kieran Trippier is older than I thought he was. There you go. Like there are some players who you think are younger than they actually are. They've just been around for so long, like you forget how old they are. But yeah, I think as I say, there's a good amount of young players suddenly coming through the league. The percentage of English players playing in the English leagues has gone up in recent seasons. It had dropped dramatically low, I think as low as 29 to 30% on one match day weekend. That's climbing again, which is good to see. So more clubs are going with their local youth talent and developing players locally rather than getting players in from overseas into their academy, which I think is important. I think that's interesting. That on a match day weekend, the average percentage of English players is now in the 40s%. It was as low, I think, as high 20s, low 30s%. So that is a positive trend that we're seeing, which I think has benefited the national side. Uh, that's I think that's benefiting the national side. Long term, when a young player first makes his first team appearance or gets a run of games, there's a lot of expectation and pressure put upon some of these young players. I think you've got to temper that. I think the media overhypes players, puts an extra lot of pressure on these players, which doesn't necessarily help with their development. And that's the crucial thing: is developing these players, making sure that their feet are grounded. Not every young player at an academy goes on and makes it as a professional. So there's a bigger emphasis now on education and training skills other than sport, so they can still, they're not throwing the scrappy. Okay, there's an award video out tonight. Okay. I don't put a lot of stock in award ceremonies really when it comes to sports. Um, I just like watching sport for what it is. If I want to look at a retired player and the awards they've won, that's different. If we're looking at like a player who's underrated but has actually been a pretty solid player in their career, depending on what sport they play, I'm more than happy to look at NHL players, rugby league players, and the NRL or Super League. Um, you know, the some of the players who won individual awards. Looking at their careers, the club and country, tournaments they played in. Um, you know that that is something that I like doing, but I don't put. Um, well, yeah, you've made obviously like your own little award kind of thing. I've done some videos on individual sports stars, and I've sort of put them in my own Hall of Fame. Haven't done one for a while though. Would be nice to do another one. Um, I think one of my favourite videos that I didn't get a lot of views, and that was the career of Earl Crabtree, one club man at Huddersfield, underrated forward, community leader off the field with some of his what he does for the local community of Huddersfield and further afield. I think yeah, definitely underrated. Should have got more appearances at international level. Would have definitely, I think, been a solid player in the NRL had he gone over to Australia. Um, and he would have earned more money as well. So he played for the love of the game. I've done a video on Adrian Morley, which is on the channel. One of my favourite players of all time. Actually, beast on the field, gentleman off it, very laid back off it, very approachable. And I think this is the difference between rugby league and other sports is in this country, it doesn't get the exposure that it does in Australia. So you can be a rugby league superstar, or at least you could, and you could get away with basically being like unknown outside of north of England. You could go in the off season down to the south coast and no one would have a clue who you are. And a lot of what has been noted in a lot of sports is a lot of these players, depending on where they play, like ice hockey, for example, if you're in like one of the southern states in the US, if you're a big name player and let's say you play for a big name team on the East Coast or in Canada, um, everyone knows who you are. You don't get a moment's peace. But if you're playing in someone like Arizona or Florida, you can just walk around town and go, I can go shopping with the wife and kids and no one has a clue who I am. This is brilliant. I like it here. And that was for tax purposes. But also, they've said, I like playing in this location because I can be very anonymous. With the rise of social media, that's more difficult to do. But in regards to you know um, certain sports, you don't get a lot of privacy, and social media doesn't help with that. And we're having a big discussion in recent years as a society about sports stars and their profile on social media, and a lot of the negative comments they get, abuse they suffer, the impact that's had on their family life, their mental and physical well being. Um, that's that's something that's been discussed a lot and is regularly discussed. But in years past, if you were in a very um, media intense location when it comes to your sport play, yeah, players have said they struggled with stress and they struggled with just getting on with being a human being um, because of the interest in the team and the location that they were playing. And a lot of them have gone, I actually enjoyed playing in this location because there was less press intrusion. Um, it was classed as a minority sport in the city or the country I was playing in, so you could be more relaxed. But now with the rise of social media and global TV rights and um, and things like that, it becomes more difficult to just relax. And don't get me wrong, being a professional athlete is a privilege. And I do think um, that a lot of athletes see it as a right rather than a privilege. And there's that kind of attitude that I think um, that needs looking at. In regards to, you know, yeah, in regards to coming up with like fan awards and things like that, I have sort of got a Hall of Fame. I think I might start doing the Sports Boffin Hall of Fame. Um, but then I'll be copying other channels. I like doing, player profiles or team profiles on individual, like the Western Suburb Magpies video I did a couple of years ago about how bad they were for like two years. That took a lot of research. Um, that was a great video to actually do. But historically bad team. I could do the Canterbury Bulldogs of this season as well, going they were really bad as well. But the Brisbane Broncos last year being really woeful. But I don't think they could be as bad as the Western Suburb Magpies of 98 and 99. There is just no comparison of how woeful they were. Um, I mean, I could do a video on Lee Centurions this year as well. They were pretty shocking. Um, but not having seen the Lee Centurions play this year, I can't obviously do a video on that. But I did see the Canterbury Bulldogs get hammered 66-0 in the heaviest defeat of the season. Admittedly, they were missing a whole host of players because of COVID breaches, but they they were hammered badly. Um, but the Brisbane Broncos over the last 2 years have had some heavy defeats as well. There's been some very lopsided scores. Um, but yeah, the Western Suburb Magpies, as their last two seasons, was a very interesting video to research and do. Uh, I looked at, doing a club history on Eintracht Frankfurt. I've missed doing like team histories because when I post them, within a year they're out of date. Within a year they're out of date. Um, but there are some clubs that I think historically have been very successful. Teams have historically been very, very successful, and may not be as successful now. Historically, got a lot of history. Maybe have a big fan base, but maybe aren't being as successful in recent years. So I might go back to doing team histories, like history of Eintracht Frankfurt, history of I might do the Bradford Bulls because they've obviously hit hard times. Um, I could do a history of Newcastle United. You know, and and then that could be very interesting to see what the viewership is. I haven't done them for a long time, and something I miss doing is the club history videos and the player profiles of you know um, like rugby league or rugby union players, football players, cricket. I've done a couple on cricketers. Um, you know, uh, it is interesting when you do these player and team profiles, and you look at what this individual player did in their career. You look at the individual awards they've won, the team success they had, the teams they play for, or lack of. Um, and then you look at the team histories of like what the teams achieved at various points in their history, how many top trophies have they won. Um, gets very, very interesting. And something I should do more of, I think. the team history, the player history videos, the sports history videos in general, looking at individual periods in sport. So I could look at the NBA and the introduction to salary cap in the NBA. I could look at Major League Baseball a little bit. There's a fair few things I could start looking into. Um, so that's something to, put on the agenda this autumn and winter. While there's not a lot of, apart from European football, not a lot really going on that interests me sports wise, because a lot of the sports I watch, like rugby league, summer, motorsport, the motorsport cycle in the Northern Hemisphere is sort of quietening down. So touring cars, NASCAR, that's sort of getting quiet. There's only a few races left in those competitions. Um, but it's definitely something I think, yeah, unless something massive happens in football, well, did today with Steve Bruce, obviously passing ways of Newcastle United. When stories like that happen, like sackings and managerial appointments, then obviously, absolutely, I will, um, look into that and you know, try my best to obviously, in that regard, do some history videos. I think something I haven't done for a while, something that I actually enjoy doing on the channel. It's just the amount of research. I love researching, you know, a player profile, an athlete profile, so a cyclist or a tennis player or a golfer. Um, you know, looking at a player's career from start to finish. I like looking at players that have retired more than active players because again, that video gets dated as soon as they play their next game or their next competition. So when someone like Roger Federer retires, or Rafa Nadal, or Djokovic, or Murray, definitely do a video on them. I could do a video on Pete Sampras if I wanted, looking at the career of Pete Sampras, and how many times he was one of the best Wimbledon champions of his era. Um, so I think, yeah, player profiles, sportsman profiles, team histories. That's something I could definitely look into. I think there's some teams that some sports that don't get the coverage they deserve, and there's some other teams that get more coverage because of where they're located in the country, media interests, past success, current success. So it'll be something to look forward to. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I've enjoyed this live stream immensely. There's been a lot of good questions, a lot of good topics we've discussed. I really appreciate it, and I'll have some more videos obviously for you very, very soon.